Okay, so we come to Exodus chapter 19 today, and we got into this a little bit on Wednesday evening, just kind of as an introduction. And we talked about the movement of the children of Israel from Rephidim over to Sinai. But let's back up just a little bit, just kind of refresh our minds as to how we got to this point in our study, or how the children of Israel really got to this point in their journey. Past 400 years, they've been doing what?
They're living in Goshen.
Living in Goshen, and a great portion of that time was given over to what? Labor, rigor, slavery, all those times that were very difficult for them. And there was a deliverer that arose, and he kind of wanted to do it his way to begin with. And who was that? Moses, yeah. And when I say his way, what did he do?
He killed an Egyptian.
He killed an Egyptian, yeah, for beating two of his countrymen. The next day he goes out again, and he sees two of his countrymen fighting. And to them, he appears to be what? An Egyptian, yes. And so they wondered why it was that he was, concerned with them fighting and arguing. He said, "What are you going to do? Kill us like you did that Egyptian yesterday?" And so he realized that he needed to get out. Because that had become known. It came to Pharaoh's knowledge that he had killed an Egyptian, and Pharaoh sought to chastise him and punish him and maybe even put him to death. And so Moses fled the country. And he went over to what area? Midian, that's right. And Midian would be north, south, east, or west from Egypt? East, yeah, east, and maybe a little north, yeah. So really, it's on the other side of the two gulfs of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba and the Gulf of Suez. Okay. And so which one of those gulfs was the closest to the land of Goshen? Suez, right. That's right. So just kind of reminding us of some of the things that we've talked about. And the Gulf of taking the traditional way of thinking, the Gulf of Suez would have been the body of water where what occurred?
Well, the army of Pharaoh was drowned.
Okay, the army of Pharaoh was drowned. What did you say, Murphy?
I said the crossing of the Red Sea.
Okay, crossing of the Red Sea. All right, so both of those events occurred concurrently, and we see that the chariots and the chariot drivers, chariot men, I guess you could say, and the horses and all of those people and animals drowned in the Red Sea. And Moses penned what about that?
He penned a song, a hymn of praise to God.
Right, that's right. So we read over that, studied that. I know you're thankful that I didn't try to sing that, but we did read through it. It's a very great song of praise to Jehovah in connection with his delivery of the people of Israel. Now, one important thing that we notice is that God guided the Israelites to where he wanted them to go in the wilderness. They weren't out there just, sometimes we say willy-nilly, just trying to find their way around, groping and looking and see where do we need to go. And Billy, what did he form to guide them?
A cloud by day and a fire by night.
Okay, so he had that pillar of cloud in the daytime and the pillar of fire at night. And how did he keep the Egyptians, but previous to the crossing of the Red Sea, how did he keep the Egyptians from gaining on the Israelites?
Put the cloud between them.
Okay, he put the pillar of cloud between them so that the people of Israel could get safely through the Red Sea. All right, very good. So they wandered a little bit, and And they were just thrilled and happy to be in the wilderness, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
What came about not shortly after they had left the land of Egypt? What do they complain about?
They complained about not having any water.
Okay. Brought us out here to die. Don't have any water. So what God tell Moses to do?
Take a branch and throw it in the water. The water became sweet because the water had been bitter.
Okay, and so that was at the place of Marah, right? All right, what else did he provide for them?
Food.
Quail and manna. Okay. And then they murmured again about water, and what did he do? All right, so he smote the rock. Okay, Moses smote the rock, and they call the place Meribah and Massah, murmuring and complaining. Okay, so they came on down then to Rephidim, and from Rephidim, we're going on to the wilderness of Sinai, going further into the wilderness of Sinai, and approaching to what mountain?
Sinai.
Also known as
Horeb.
Right. Okay, so they're approaching this mountain, and now God is about to speak to Moses and in the hearing of the people, actually. But before we get there, let's let's look at this briefly. As I mentioned Wednesday evening, we touched on 3 or 4 of these slides. And so in the 3rd month of the Exodus, they moved from Rephidim down to Sinai. They camped in the wilderness before the mountain. And what that means is that they didn't go up in the mountain. They were just there below the mountain, camping there, and I guess there would have been a plain of some kind, however small or large. But this area, this region, was referred to as wilderness, right? The wilderness of sin, wilderness of Sinai. And so in the wilderness, you typically find little oases. You typically find little place that is comfortable to stay. And what I mean by that, there's not a lot of shade and not a lot of water and not a lot of flat land for you to stay, to live there. But they were camped there in that rugged area before the mountain. And so Moses goes up the mountain, and after Jehovah calls unto him, and Jehovah calls unto him and says, I'm going to send you a message for the people. You're going to go down and you're going to tell the people how they're to prepare for what I'm about to do. And so he calls them the house of Jacob and the children of Israel. And Wednesday night, as we mentioned, this is really the same people, right? He's emphasizing that these people belong to Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. And not only are they the children of Israel, but they are going to be his people. And he's going to be very specific about how he brings that forth. He's going to talk about that, and he's going to give instruction to Moses about how that's going to come about. And so he said, I want you to tell the people, remember how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. So what's the idea of being born on eagle's wings?
Being lifted up, carried aloft.
Okay, lifted up, carried aloft. An eagle's a mighty and majestic animal. A bird, you know, it's really, as we look upon them, technically they're scavengers. But they are large birds, and they fly very high, and they have command of the sky. And so it is with all of that. God says, I brought you out as with a majestic bird, as a majestic bird, and I brought you unto myself. And he says, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be my people. So let me ask you this. How important is it to be God's people?
Very important.
Okay? What difference does it make if we're God's people or not?
we don't worship and serve him, we don't have anything.
Okay. We have nothing. So it's the difference really between salvation and damnation, isn't it? And so when God says, I will make you my people, did the Israelites stand up and say, well, it's about time? I mean, here we are, such a great people, a slave nation. No, they didn't deserve it any more than we do. And so when God says to Christians, I'm going to make you my people, I'm going to write my words in your hearts, I'm going to care for you, I'm going to provide you salvation from sin. Well, we're no more worthy of that than the Israelites were, being a slave nation, because we are really a slave nation. We're indebted to sin, right?
Yes.
So he sent his son to bring us out and provide for our salvation. So he did the same with the Israelites. He made them his people. Although in that connection, obviously, he did not provide salvation for their sins only to the extent that they obeyed the law faithfully, looking forward to the Lamb of God to come for that sacrifice. But he says, I'm going to make you my own possession. He claimed the obedience of the people of Israel, and it's important that we recognize that. As we talk about the nation of Israel, we have to remember that they were made up at this particular time of all types of people. There weren't just Israelites, but there were people that attached themselves to the Israelites as they came out of captivity, right? That's why he often refers to the foreigners or the strangers in your gates. Those are ones that were not born of the tribe of Israel, but they became Israelites to the extent that they wanted to be with this people. They recognized God had blessed this people. They wanted to be a part of this people and receive the blessings that came from God. And so there's a kind of a parallel there between Jews and Gentiles in the New Covenant. Maybe we'll get to that at some future point. But God said Israel will be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And we compared 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, where Peter writes that we are to be a holy nation, a separate people, a kingdom of priests. And so, as Israel was to God a precious people, then Christians are to God as well. So a lot of similarity we see in a lot of application and illustration that can be made in connection with that. And let me just point out to you that as we, and you already know this, as we start here in chapter 19 and we move forward through the Scriptures, with very little exception, there's going to be time after time after time where we're going to see the book of Romans really fulfilled. Or the prophesied, I guess I should say. Romans really not a fulfillment of itself. But prophesied, and how that there was a difference between God's people and those that weren't God's people. And we see that in the New Covenant today. And so Israel responded in verse 8 by saying, all that you have commanded will we do. So that gets us to, as someone mentioned, I think maybe Albie mentioned Wednesday night, the preamble, if you will, of the Ten Commandments, because there's preparation being made here for the giving of the Ten Commandments over in chapter 20. And so in verse 8 of Exodus 19, we read, and all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. In verse 9, the Lord said to Moses, behold, I shall come to you in a thick cloud. And so he's getting information to Moses. He's telling Moses that you need to prepare the people to be sanctified. I'm going to come to you in a thick cloud. I'm going to converse with you, but you need to prepare the people. Because I can't come down on that mount and speak with you if the people are not sanctified in my sight. What's that tell us about the nature of God?
He's holy.
He is holy. He cannot approach unto sin. He cannot be associated with those that are sinful, those that And sinful, when I'm talking about sinful, I'm talking about those that are habitually involved in sin. He cannot approach that because he is holy. And so he said, I'm going to come down in this dark cloud so that they, that is the people, might hear and believe on me. And so while he was not speaking directly to the people would witness all of this. We'll get into that here in just a few verses. But he says, I want you to sanctify the people today and tomorrow, and I will come down on Mount Sinai inside of the people on the third day. Now, when the Lord says that he's going to come down inside of the people, what has he already given as a prerequisite for his appearance? How's he going to do that?
Cloud.
In the cloud. So he's going to come down in the cloud. So they're not going to look upon his form. No. Moses is not going to look upon his form. No man has ever seen God, because we can't see God and live. Because, again, he is holy. So even later when God appeared unto Moses and he passed by, he told Moses, he says, I will put my hand over your face so that you do not see me, lest you die. So even for a man that was, cut from the cloth of faithfulness, and Moses was still a human being. He was still mortal, and he could not look upon God. So he said, tell the people, do not touch the mountain. Do not go up to the border of the mountain. And now, I've never seen Mount Sinai. I've seen pictures, and we'll probably see a picture here in a few minutes of what people think is Mount Sinai. Of course, it, after time has eroded it somewhat, it looks different today, obviously, than it would have been Moses' day, but I don't know what the border of the mountain would have been, except to say that God marked a border that they could not go past. And he did that by telling Moses, don't let the people go up or touch the border of the mountain. Whatever that demarcation would have been, they would have understood that. And he says, whoever does, whether it's beast or man, what will happen?
Die.
Put to death. They'll be put to death, that's right. And so in context of the passage here, when he says be put to death, we're assuming, I think, in reading that it will not be mankind that will put him to death, but it will be God that will do that. And so anyone that goes up to the border will be put to death. Whether that is instantaneous or not, we don't know, because the people were obedient and they did not go up to the border of the mountain. I want you to have them wash their clothes. Yes, Mark.
That does say about that point about the dying, verse 13, it does say they shall be stoned or shot, so that might
Okay.
be the case.
All right. Okay, very good. Yeah, let's read that. Let's go start with verse 12. Mark, if you don't mind, would you read those two verses, 12 and 13?
You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain.
Okay, very good. Thank you for pointing that out. And so, evidently, God would command the people of Israel to take care of that. And that would, I guess, emphasize the fact that, hey, we're putting some of our own to death, and God means what he says about that. So appreciate you bringing that up. And so then they were commanded also to wash their clothes, clean themselves, wash their clothes, and men and women were to stay apart. And so they were really to sanctify themselves, to make themselves holy before God. Now, we know that God has said that relationship between man and his wife is a holy relationship. However, to be sanctified before Jehovah, and to receive His word, God said, this is what you'll do. Stay away from one another until this is done. So that's what they did. And so then the third day came. And just as Jehovah had promised, He came down in that dark cloud. There were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud. Where the presence of God was, there was a voice of an exceeding loud trumpet. The people trembled in the camp. Thunders, lightnings, a thick cloud, the voice of an exceeding loud trumpet, and the people trembled. You know, in the springtime, when we have storms here, often there is extremely loud thunder. And we talk about a clap of thunder. You ever been sitting in the house, maybe doing something or thinking about something, and out of the blue a clap of thunder come? I mean, you didn't see the lightning maybe, and it just shakes you, and it just rumbles, you know. I used to live in coal mining country. And I've been around some mines, and they were where they would be strip mining. I've been around some mines where there was underground mining going on. And occasionally there would be blasts. In later years, you know, they had safer ways of doing that. They had machines that called long wall machines that would run and would get the dirt and all of that out with the coal. But they used to blast for that. And if you've ever been around that kind of thing, it just shakes the ground. Some of you may have been out close to the depot when they were shooting the tanks. And you hear this sound, and then boom! You imagine how the people of Israel felt when the Lord came down on the mountain. And the place shook. Thunders roared. Lightning flashed. And He descends in the thick cloud. That would have been something else to see, wouldn't it? And this voice of this exceeding loud trumpet, is there any wonder why the people would tremble in the camp? And so Moses called the people out to meet God. And they came up not to the border of the mountain, but close to it. They saw Mount Sinai quake. They saw it smoke, and the smoke ascend up like a great furnace. And the voice of the trumpet got louder and louder and louder. This is not something that you see every day. This is not something perhaps that the Israelites had ever seen. They had never been in the presence of God like this before. Yes, they saw the angel pass over, the destroyer pass over, or heard about it because they were inside. They heard the cries of the people, but they'd never seen anything this cataclysmic, if you will. And so they trembled. And then after all this, Jehovah speaks to Moses. Let's look in verse 19 of chapter 19. When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down," and He reminds him again, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And also let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." When Moses speaks and the Lord answers him in thunder, I really don't know what that was like, other than the Scripture says that's what happened. That would have been an amazing thing to have seen and heard. And so He said, "Go down and warn the people again not to touch the mountain, because if they do, they shall die. Moses brought Aaron up with him after he visited the people and reminded them, and also told the priests to consecrate themselves. He brought Aaron with him up into the mount. Now, as I said, I don't know what Mount Sinai looks like, but this is a picture of what people think Mount Sinai looked like. And I don't know the height. I didn't research how tall that was. But I imagine it was pretty tall. But still, out in the wilderness where it was barren, the people around the base of the Mount Sinai would have been able to see all of that. See, it's not covered with vegetation like our mountains are. It's not covered with trees. I mean, we can look out, you know, if our view is high enough, we can look out and we can see Cheehaw across the way, but it's covered with trees. If you're over on 21 and, you know, toward Alexandria, that area, and you come back through the bypass, you can look at that mountain, but all you can see is trees. This place was barren. And so the perfect place for the Lord to come down. And as they saw the mountain quake and the smoke ascend like a great furnace and the thick cloud of the Lord there, that would have been an awesome sight to see. And it would have instilled fear in them, and it did. Yet Moses was asked to go down again and warn them for at least the second time, maybe the third, to tell them not to approach. I know how people are, Jehovah says. I know they're going to get curious, and when things calm down, I begin to speak to you, they're going to want to break through and see what I look like. You said that's not going to happen. And so when we come to Exodus chapter 20, we learn that there are actually three people with God on the mount. We don't often talk about that. Moses, Aaron, and Hur. I'm sorry. No. That's not correct. Hur's not there on this occasion. It's just Moses and Aaron. I don't know why I had Hur in my mind. But Moses and Aaron and Jehovah are on the mount in Exodus chapter 20. And Exodus chapter 20, as you know, is the chapter where God gives the Ten Commandments. And so Moses is there. He's ready to hear what the Lord has to say. And so Jehovah speaks. What follows is a conversation of utmost importance to mankind. God has claimed the people as his own if what?
We obey them.
If they obey. That's right. Hear my words and obey them. And they have agreed, all that you say we will do. So I referenced Deuteronomy 29:29 here because what he told the people to do, they were to do. But now God didn't reveal to the Israelites everything in his mind, just as he's not revealed to us everything in his mind. Specifically, he did not reveal to them at this point, in this juncture, his plan to bring Jesus into the world. But he did tell them what they needed to do. And so Deuteronomy 29, verse 29, the secret things belong to the Lord. And I'm paraphrasing here, but the things which he has told us to do, we are to do. They are to be for us, and our children, and our children's children, so forth. And so God didn't tell them everything in his plan, but he did tell them what they needed to do. And there's a point I want to make about that. God tells us today in the new covenant what he wants us to do. And he expects us, just as he expected Israel, to follow those things, to agree to them, and as a result, we will be not only pleasing to God, but we will receive the blessings attendant with those. obedience to those commandments. And that starts with a very basic thing of believing who He is. Faith, repentance from sin, a desire to follow after Him. And on the very beginning of our journey, confessing that Jesus is the Son of God, and then being baptized to wash our sins away, and then remaining faithful. All those things that we talk about, we refer to as the steps to salvation. But then beyond that, He gives us instruction how to live with one another. He gives us instruction how to worship Him. He gives us all these other instructions about what we should do when this particular instance comes up or that particular instance comes up. And He tells us with whom to associate and with whom not to associate and all of those things. The guidebook for our life, if you will. How to raise our children. All those things. But He hasn't told us everything. And there's a reason for that. But these words shape our world. These words, these 10 commandments that He gave to the people of Israel, even to a great extent, shape our world today. Religious people in general try to follow these. This lesson is not about the difference between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, okay? I'm just simply making a point here that God expects us to follow what He has told us to do. He told the Israelites, be my people, and you will be my people by following my words, hearing them. So that's what they were to do. But even these things that He told to the people, the Israelites, and Moses, as He gave Moses the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai, these things are written for our learning. Romans chapter 15 and verse 4 talks about that. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 11, these things were written for our example, upon whom the ends of the world come. And so we're to pay attention and to learn from it. Galatians 3:24 through 27. This was a schoolmaster to bring us into Christ. And so we could go on and on about that. And so when we talk about the 10 Commandments, let us give them their due reverence, their due praise and honor. Because all of these are formulated into what God tells us to do in regard to being Christians, with the exception of the Sabbath day. So I just want to make that point as we go along. He says, I am Jehovah. I am Jehovah thy God. I'm the God that brought you out of Egypt. I'm the God that brought you through the Red Sea. I'm the God that gave you water in the wilderness. I'm the God that gave you quail and manna and continues to do so every day of your life. You go out in the morning and what do you see? You see the manna. You go out in the evening and what do you see? You see the quail. And He did that for them for 40 years. Until they were in the land and able to glean the crops, that first harvest that they didn't even plant. Make no other gods before me. You notice how I've got that word gods in lowercase. I realize that in making this slide the way I make it, it sounds like I'm shouting at you. At least that's what one lady told me one time. She was, involved in, preparing PowerPoints and stuff like that. She said, when you do that in all caps, you're shouting at us, right?
Yeah.
I thought, well, look at me. Do you think I'm really shouting? But I understand what you mean. But for emphasis' sake, that's why I do that. And because my eyes are getting older, as everyone's is, and that helps us read it a little easier. With that lowercase God, make no other idols before me. Make no other gods. Make no graven image or likeness in heaven or in earth. So there's no worship of angels that's acceptable with God. There's no worship of beasts that's acceptable to God. There's no worship of any mortal human that's acceptable to God, or any other graven image. A bird with a man's body with a bird, or a man's body with a bull, or whatever. That's not acceptable. And that would include Mary, the mother of Jesus. It would include Paul the Apostle. It would include any quote-unquote saint that mankind would come up with. Yes, Bill?
You covered it pretty well. But the statues of Jesus that are in the Catholic Church and in other places, those are not to be worshipped either. Jesus is spirit. There's nothing about Jesus that's had a solid form.
Right.
And you see, statues of Jesus over cemeteries. You see statues of Jesus in the Catholic Church. You see some airfields have statues of Jesus at the end of the airfield. It's those are, I understand what they're for, but they're not to be worshipped and bowed down to and prayed to either.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Jesus was very plain about that. Those that worship God worship Him in spirit and in truth. And that's not just talking about the attitude. It's talking about the fact that they are spiritual beings. George?
You were talking about, you referred to Romans about those things, but in chapter 1, Paul talks about how Israel, the Jews, whatever, had turned to worshiping, it said, exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible men and of birds, 4-foot animals, crawling creatures. He just talking about how they become adulterous. But there were spiritual things they had done, coveting and things like that, that they've been warned against. That goes against coveting what your neighbor has. That's covered in the Ten Commandments.
That's right.
So that's why you need to read and study the Old Testament to understand what's being talked about in the New Testament.
Right. That's right. Very good point. And the Lord says at the end of that, I am a jealous God. I am a jealous God. Now, the New Testament teaches us against jealousy from the standpoint of our human nature, how we would look, how we would view things. Okay? And we understand what that's about. But God is a jealous God from the standpoint of righteousness, where He covets His people in their righteousness. He is jealous over them. I am a jealous God. You see that many times throughout the Bible. And He's bringing that up here, I think, from what I remember correctly, for the first time in the Old Covenant to His people. I am a jealous God. I covet you with a godly jealousy. I want you to be who you're supposed to be. And that character of God has not changed. He always wants us to be what we should be. He wants us to be holy unto Him. And that's one reason why He said, sanctify me the people. And on the third day I will come before you. So He continues to talk about this, and from the standpoint of iniquity and loving kindness, He said, I will visit iniquity upon the third and fourth generations of those that hate me. Iniquity visited upon the third and fourth generations of those that hate me. You say, well, wait a minute, that just does not seem to jive with what Ezekiel talked about in Ezekiel chapter 20. chapter 18 and chapter 20. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. But that is true, the soul that does sin, and the Son shall not bear the iniquity of the Father, nor the Father the iniquity of the Son. But God says here that this is so important that you sanctify me as holy, that I am your God, that I will visit iniquity upon the third and fourth generation of those that hate me. Billy?
The book of Ruth shows the genealogy of David. David was the 10th generation. You go over the Psalms, it says, because of the 10th generation, he was happy when they said, come and let us go to the house of the Lord. Because his father couldn't go. He was in the 9th generation. The 10th generation was allowed to go to the temple.
Good.
I believe what he's talking about here is consequences. He's not going to directly punish them because of who they are. He's going to put the consequence there, and they will have to suffer through that. I believe we've got a prediction of 40 years of wandering here.
Yes.
But they still got the right and the ability to choose to do right before God, even though they're suffering consequences.
Right. And the other thing about that is this. If you've got a generation that hates God, what's the following generation going to do?
Well, they're going to be the same way.
That's what they're taught. They're not, God is not honored in their eyes. He's not sanctified before them. And so, as we see that go along, then certainly that is the case. And what Al states may very well be the case if he's foretelling what's going to occur in the wilderness. We'll see some more of that as we go along. But he said, I also show loving kindness to thousands that love me and keep my commandments. Thousands. There's the emphasis there against, we've got the third and fourth generation, and then there are thousands that love God and thousands that obey Him. And so that's a beautiful thing to see. And in many cases, that was indeed the fact that the Israelites were very faithful to God. And so we look forward to seeing that, and we see how God shows His loving kindness to them. And so don't take my name in vain. He said, thou shalt not take the name of Jehovah thy God in vain. Today, there are examples of that when, OMG, that's a big, big thing.
Oh, yeah.
People say today. Gosh, another form of God's word. Golly, gee, we don't often hear golly and gee as much as we used to back in, 50s and 60s. That was more common. But the misuse of Jesus, people will exclaim, Jesus. Or they'll say, Jesus Christ, and that's vanity. That's taking the Lord's name in vain, along with other such euphemisms. And it doesn't only apply to God's name, but it applies to accusations that we make against God. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Words like GD and things like that. And referencing hell and using the euphemism of heck and those types of things in those ways. My granddaughters unfortunately have a relative, and that's her favorite phrase. What the H? And we can always tell when they've been with her, because they're little minor birds. And we have to kind of say, well, that's not what we should say. And so another example of the third and fourth generation. If there's no correction made, then what happens? Don't take my name in vain. Yes?
I was just going to mention in Deuteronomy 6 and 7, yet the Israelites were instructed to teach the children, when they rise up and when they go down, that, God's name is to be held in reverence.
Yes.
And they're to be taught that every day.
Yes.
And what happens, you get people who hate God or disobedient people become rebellious, then they don't hear that anymore and they just fall in line with the rest of the people. That makes my favorite, one of my favorite verses very prominent, because Jeremiah, he talks about, man don't know what he's doing. He needs to be guided. Right. Because we can see what happens when man uses his own judgment. That's not good.
That's right. That's right. Jehovah will not hold us guiltless if we take his name in vain. Then he says, remember the Sabbath day. Remember, the idea here is this is not new. This is not the first time that you've heard this. Remember the Sabbath day. He talked about the Sabbath day in the institution of the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He said that he talked about those days being holy and how they should be mindful of that, and how it had been taught since the creation, how God created things in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That is something that is to be observed, something that is to be practiced. And which Sabbath day would that be?
The one in each week.
Okay, every one of them. That's right. That's right. The Lord goes on to say there will be work done in 6 days. The 7th is a Sabbath or a holy day to Jehovah. And when he talks about no work being done, he said, don't work yourself. Your son or your daughter is to work. Your manservant, your maidservant is not to work. Your cattle is not to work. In other words, there's no plowing or anything, no pulling of carts or anything of that nature. The stranger within your gates, and here's where we get back to that point that I made earlier about those that came out with them from Egypt. The stranger that lives in your gates is not to do any work. Jehovah rested and he blessed the 7th day. And so you are to maintain the Sabbath day with no work and make it holy. Now, what is the substitution to be made on the Sabbath day? If there's no work to be done, what is substituted for that?
Say worship of God.
Worship. That's right, worship. How important did the Lord view the Sabbath day?
Like Moses.
Okay. If one violated the Sabbath day, what would occur? Stoned. That's right.
Stoned.
That's right. How important is the first day of the week to the Lord?
Most very important.
Okay. Are there things that we do on the first day of the work that cannot be done on any other day? Okay. We can assemble this morning. We're going to partake of the Lord's Supper. As Acts chapter 20 and verse 7 tells us that upon the first day of the week, the saints came together to do that. We can't do it any other day of the week. Does the new covenant tell us not to do any work on the first day of the week?
No. One of the examples we give people coming together on the first day of the week, they've been working all day and they were up there at night, and that's when Eutychus fell all off.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. But we are to assemble, right?
Right.
So whatever time during that first day that the brethren have decided they're going to assemble together, what are Christians supposed to be doing?
Assembling, yeah.
Okay. Now,
That comes back to your authority. You have apostolic example of it being done.
Right.
And they thought it was important to do, and we should follow.
Exactly.
Hebrews 10:24-5. Yeah.
Right.
Jeremy, and we should also put God first on that day.
Right.
That's right.
Always.
That's right.
Period.
Okay. Yeah, not just that day, but that day especially. You're right. Well, he goes on to talk about not defrauding others and the following commandments. Honor your father and your mother for long life in the land. That's what he said. Honor your father and mother, and you will have long life in the land. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. And do not covet. All of those things, if we commit those types of sins, then we're defrauding, in many cases, ourselves, but in all cases, we're defrauding others of something that belongs to them that we should not be taking. If we defraud and do not honor our father and mother, then we're dishonoring them, we're taking their honor from them, basically. If we're killing someone, then we're taking their life from them. We're defrauding them of their life. If we're committing adultery, then we're defrauding a family of a spouse.
That's right.
And the Lord's specific about that in that we sin against ourselves when we do that. If we steal, then we're defrauding. If we're bearing false witness, we're defrauding. We're taking respect and character, well, not character, but what people perceive of another person, we're taking that from them. And of course, coveting is not actually a physical act, it's more of a mental act. We're taking the rightfulness of a good name and the rightfulness of what belongs to someone else from them, and we're defrauding them. And we're defrauding ourselves in that regard. So there was great fear that came upon the people, again, as a result of all those things. They saw the thunderings and lightnings. They heard the voice of the trumpet. They saw the mountain smoking. They trembled and they stood afar off. When all of that occurred, you could just see the congregation of the people backing up. And that's natural, right? That's what we would have done. And so in verse 19, the people told Moses, "Speak thou with us." Let's talk with you, Moses, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us lest we die. God gained their respect on that occasion, didn't he?
Sure enough.
So that's important for us to consider and to understand. Let not God speak with us lest we die. We should have that same reverence. Not being fearful of God's words necessarily, but understanding the greatness of His power and His majesty and His supreme rule over us. Moses told them to fear not. This is another one of those cases where if you're just reading it and not understanding the context, you think, well, he said fear not, and then he said fear. What does he mean? Moses told them to fear not. God has come down to prove you. He's come down to test you. He's come down to show you really that He is supreme and that you are His people. His fear may be before you that you sin not. And so reverence, holy fear, fear that is profitable, fear that is good, not fear from the standpoint that you're so scared to death that you can't hear, you can't understand the cause of the fear that's among you. People continued to stand afar off as Moses went into the darkness of the cloud where God was. Jehovah indeed is real. He told Moses to speak to the people and remind them how He spoke to them from heaven. And I think this is one of those commandments that God gives Moses that is to be a continual thing. It's like when you rise up and when you sit down, like George was talking about. This is to be a continual thing. Remind them how I spoke to them from heaven with a mighty and a commanding voice. Do not make other gods of silver or of gold. And when you make altars to me, make them of earth or unhewn stone, without the tool laid upon it, without steps, lest what? Why did he not want steps up to the altar? Lest they see your nakedness. That's right. And as we go on, we're going to see that when the priest's garments are made, then they make breeches for the priest to wear so that the nakedness would not be seen. And while they still didn't have steps up the altar, they would have to step up to go into the tabernacle. And they would be, bending over and slaughtering animals and all those things. And so that was important. While they were girded, they would have to have some covering underneath. Sacrifice thy burnt offerings and thy peace offerings, sheep and oxen. Wherever I record my name, I will come to you and bless you. And so as they were traveling, God would come to them, and I am Jehovah thy God. He would come upon the people, and he would tell them what he wanted to tell them, and he would bless them at that time. And as I stated, lifting up a tool on the stone to build an altar would defile it. I've got this here not necessarily to show that this is where these places, these stopping places were. I have any idea if this is accurate or not. The reason I put this particular map up here is to show you how that the wilderness of Sinai came deep down into the peninsula here between the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. And so and I wish I'd have had this on the screen when we were talking about the Amalekites. The Amalekites think, well, here's this people, they're down here, and they look like they've got to come out somewhere, and then they come out and fight against us. Who knows? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to attack them first. They would think that this people was wedged in. They have nowhere to go. They got the sea on the east, they got the sea on the west, they got the mountains in the north, they got the sea on the south. Let's just go down there and wipe them out. God had other plans, he took care of them. And so that's really the reason I put that particular map up there. It's a more modern version. You see the modern names that are used there, but it does show their idea of where Rephidim may have been. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. Any final comments or questions before we conclude this morning? Okay, thank you so much.